What's up, guys? Welcome to G Whiskey. My name is Jeff. Now, this is a channel where I offer my thoughts and opinions on a specific whiskey, and if you stick around to the end, I'll be giving it a score as well. If that sounds interesting, hit subscribe down below, and with that out of the way, why don't we jump into our review? Today, we're looking at the Ardbeg Uigeadail. Stick around. Alright, so we've got the biggest superstar whiskey of 2012. We're looking at the Ardbeg Uigeadail today. Obviously, I am kidding there. This whiskey is still immensely popular. But I remember back in like the early 2010s, man, this was the coolest whiskey you could have. Everyone was talking about it, everyone was buying it. It was considered the pinnacle of affordable peated Islay whiskey at the time, and it kind of was. Of course, there were other beautiful whiskeys on the scene, but none had quite the same presence as a good bottle of Uigeadail. And this bottle is probably one of the whiskeys I've consumed the most of in my life, probably top 3. My friends and I used to buy up the batches, drink them back to back, loving every minute of it. You know, it was a simpler time. We didn't really do much exploring in terms of whiskey. We kind of stuck with what we knew, but we love this stuff. Like, this stuff was basically our favorite whiskey for several years, and I think now, just being a wiser and more developed alcoholic whiskey aficionado, it's going to be interesting coming back to this stuff and just seeing where it's at now. And I don't know what happened, because we don't really buy this stuff that much anymore. I think initially we just started buying it less and less, then once in a while, then once in a blue moon, and I reached the point where this is actually the first bottle I've had in maybe 4 or 5 years. And if I'm being honest, the last bottle I bought a few years back, I enjoyed less than I typically had before that. It was still a good bottle. I think it was like a 2016, 2017 batch. Still a good bottle. We drank it, we enjoyed it, but it wasn't where it had been prior to that. Now, the bottle I've got with me today is a 2019 batch. I probably should have looked for something a little bit newer, but whatever, it's what I've got. This will be the most recent batch of Uigeadail I've tried to date. And I think it'll be an interesting one to revisit. I'm hoping it wins me over like those old batches from way back in the day did, but we'll see. So why don't we hop into our review of this one, see what it's all about, and in the meantime, if you could kindly leave a like down below, that'd be greatly appreciated. So our ABV here comes in at 54.2%, which is perfect for me. That falls right in the what I call Goldilocks ABV zone, where it's not quite too heavy, but it's still got a very substantial set of flavors. Now, of course, I do love the bigger stuff, but they often run the risk of coming off too heavy or too beastly. That being said, a lot of whiskeys do pull it off perfectly. So yeah, for me, 51 to 55% ABV is usually perfect. Beyond that, this one is also going to be non-chill filtered and naturally colored, so it's looking good. Tinted bottle, so we can't make out the color of the liquid inside. I like that Ardbeg kind of keeps their bottles old school. This is a classic design. They've had it since I started drinking Ardbeg, and I like that they're not changing it. You know, everyone's rebranding these days, and not these guys, so it's a very distinctive look. I wouldn't say it's modern, but it's not too flashy. I think it's stylish, so presentation score, 3.5 out of 5. It does mention being non-chill filtered, nothing about natural color. We literally have 3 words on the front for tasting notes: treacle, bacon, and bonfire. Okay, we have our blurb on the back. A little bit markety, but nothing too obnoxious. It does touch on the production process. Overall, yeah, classic Ardbeg bottle. Solid as ever. I like it. Let's try our nose. So, unsurprisingly, big peat, big sherry, but the two are not separate. They're kind of like married together here. Petrol, brine, seaweed. Of course, we have some peat in here, some red fruits. Definitely some like all sorts licorice, tar, caramel, some lemon zest, cracked peppercorn, and some cherries in here. This is complex and intense. Let's try the palate. Big, rugged, medicinal. Of course, peat, of course, sherry. Tobacco, black forest cake, there's some orange zest in here, some peppercorn, and some band-aids. Now the finish. Okay, peat, sherry, band-aids, more black forest cake, bubblegum, okay. Malt, soot, ash, dark roast coffee. We have a tiny little hint of menthol in here too. This is a big finish, it's a long finish, but it's quite rounded. Okay, so Uigeadail batches have been notoriously different over the years, and back in this whiskey's heyday, Felt like anyone and everyone was kind of like tracking these batches, comparing, contrasting. It was just kind of the thing to do back then. Nowadays, it seems like people are doing that less and less, so I don't know how consistent of a whiskey this is, or if it still changes pretty dramatically between batches. I probably should have done more research on that, but yeah, my batch of Uigeadail probably isn't the same as your batch, so be aware of that. So all I can do, all anyone can ever do, is comment on the bottle they have, and the first thing I have to say about this one is that it is not where it used to be. This whiskey has changed, and in my opinion, for the worse. Now, that might be a batch thing, that might be a nostalgia issue on my end, but I don't think so. I remember the old batches, while they did vary, on the whole, they were consistently better than what we're getting here. They were just more substantial, more complex. And it's kind of hard to pick apart where the exact differences are, because on paper, this is the Uigeadail. A lot of those same elements are still there. You have the big sherry, the big peat. I suppose if I could pinpoint one area where I find it to be lacking in comparison would be the complexity. The nose is still beautiful, but the palate and especially the finish just don't have the layers that it used to. Of course, it is still a layered whiskey, and it's still a beautiful whiskey on the whole. But man, this stuff was epic once upon a time. I mean, you could just live in those flavors. And what I've got here is still very big, it's very intense, but it's slightly more superficial. The flavors don't work off of each other quite as well as they used to. I'm not a big fan of that bubblegum note, and just on the whole, there's a flatness to the overall experience that I never got before. I'm coming across negative here, I do realize that, but I'm going to keep going. Listen, I know this is a beloved brand. I love Ardbeg, everyone loves Ardbeg, but I don't think it's where it used to be. It's still a great distillery and it's still better than most, but it's not quite the same these days. The same flatness that I get in this, I noticed in my last two bottles of the 10. I haven't had the Corey Vrecken in a while, so I can't comment on that. The 5 was nice, okay. But the last Ardbeg I had that really captured that magic that they used to have was the Black release, which was a special release from 1 or 2 years ago. I haven't tried any of the special releases since then, although I do hear they're good. Which leads me to suspect they might be putting a little bit too much effort into these limited editions or these special editions, and I don't want to say neglecting the core range, but yeah, it's not what it used to be. Meanwhile, these special edition bottlings get bigger and bigger every year. They're well received, they're well reviewed, they sell out quickly, people love them, and they're pretty damn expensive too. And I don't know, I feel like Ardbeg might have just shifted their focus too far in that direction. I do feel like the core range isn't getting the same amount of TLC as it once did. Of course, total speculation on my part. Either way, I just spent the last few minutes knocking on this stuff. I'm still going to give it a good score. It's still getting 87. And 87, of course, is a good whiskey score, but it's not a particularly good Uigeadail score. It's definitely at the lower end of the spectrum. Some of those older batches would have easily scored in the 90s for me. This one can't quite measure up. And you know, I always say I don't want to be one of those old whiskey curmudgeons that whines that whiskey used to be so much better back in the day. I don't think I am, but tell you what, once in a while it does apply. This whiskey used to be better. But that being said, it's still a delicious whiskey. I mean, really, really good. And it's one you should try if you haven't had it yet. The reason I'm bashing it so much is just because I remember the old stuff. I love the old stuff. It was genuinely epic. So not a very fair comparison. Still one you should try if you haven't. I think value is pretty good here. You're getting a cask strength peat and sherry blast with an Ardbeg twist, and I don't think you're paying too much for it. And I think that if you're late to the Uigeadail party, if you haven't tried it yet, you still should. It's not what it used to be, but it is still good, and I think it's one of the better Ardbeg core range options to be had. Listen, Ardbeg Uigeadail used to be required viewing for whiskey lovers back in the day, and I think that's still true. Alright, that's it for me today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. As always, hit subscribe down below, click that little bell icon, and of course, smash the like. Now, I do want to hear from you. Have you tried a recent batch of Ardbeg Uigeadail? How would you compare it to some previous batches that you've had? And finally, down in the comments, let me know what you want to see me review next, and I'll keep it in mind for my upcoming videos. Bye, guys.